Hey everybody, welcome back to Pre-Law Talk. My name is Joshua Garlick and I'll be your host. I'm a current BYU Idaho communications student who is going to be applying to law school very soon. This podcast has been created to help undergraduates and high school students understand a little bit more about law school and what they can do to get in. We'll be talking about the LSAT and how to prepare to take it, as well as the application process and choosing law school and some advice. Just a little reminder about the LSAT. This is an incredibly important part of your application process into law school. So it's something to take serious and something to put time and effort into. The LSAT tests skills that can be improved upon, so practice is really the best way to improve your score on the LSAT. Today we'll be talking about the reading comprehension section. We'll be going into what you should look for while you're reading, what will the questions ask, and some challenges you'll face within this section. So just a little bit more about the reading comprehension section. What it looks like is half a page of a single column that you'll have to read, and then 5 to 8 questions per article. And you'll do that 4 times within 35 minutes. So let's talk about what you should look for while you're reading that article. 3 important things to look for are the main point, the organization of paragraphs, and the viewpoints. The main point is going to be the most important thing that you understand within each and every passage that you read, You're going to be looking for what the author is trying to tell you, as well as in what order he's telling you these things. The organization of paragraphs is important because you want to know when the author is stating his conclusion, and when he's supporting that conclusion, when he's refuting that conclusion, or other people's conclusions. You want to understand what each individual paragraph is saying, and then be able to relate those to one another. You also want to be looking for the viewpoints, like I said, especially the viewpoint of the author. It'll be pretty subtle within the article, but you can get glimpses of what the author is thinking about the topic that he's writing about, as well as other mentioned parties within the article. So some common parties that come into play in these articles might include some critics, many critics, scientists, and etc. So you want to understand what each individual viewpoint part of the party is and distinguish between those different viewpoints. But let's talk about the questions that'll be asked to you. So almost 100% of the passages will ask you what the main point of the passage is. And that'll almost always be the very first question that you get for each passage. So you want to know what the main point is, and you want to have it in your mind well enough that you can answer that question pretty quickly. You also will be asked about the importance of specific paragraphs against other ones. So they might ask you, what was the main point of paragraph 2? Or it might ask you, what role did paragraph 2 play in paragraph 3? So you want to be able to compare and contrast those and figure out, that organization. You also will be asked about viewpoints of certain groups. So this is why it's important to know, what does the author think? And what would he agree to based on that logic and that reasoning, as well as the other important parties that are mentioned. It might ask you, which of the following would some critics agree with? And then it'll list out A, B, C, D, E, and you'll need to know what some critics have said and what their viewpoint is. You'll also be asked about some specific references to the passage. These are best to look for after you've already read the entire passage and you're going through the questions, because it'll give you a specific line or a reference within the passage that you can go back to and find the answer. So it might say something like, what does the word, indicative mean in line 5? What did the author mean by that? And then you'll go back a little bit before then, you'll read the whole sentence, or you'll get a gist of what the author was talking about in that moment, and then you'll go back to the question and answer the question. And that can happen for specific words within the passage, or sentences, ideas, or paragraphs. Sorry about that. Moving on, we'll talk about some of the challenges you'll face within this specific section. I know this is probably the most familiar section of the 3 that you'll be facing during the LSAT, but it's different than any other test you've probably taken. So the first challenge is, and the biggest challenge, is timing. Because you've got to read fast, and you've got to understand the main point, and you have to have the organization down. You have to catch those viewpoints if you're going to answer questions pretty quickly. So the first time you read through the passage, you want to pay attention to the forest and not the trees. So just to explain that a little bit, the forest is the main point. It's the conclusion. It's the organization of individual paragraphs. The trees are the details. You don't want to look into the details because you'll have to come back anyways to look up those specific references to the questions that are being asked. So pay attention to the forest and not the trees. Another challenge you'll face is answering can be very difficult because a lot of the answers can be very similar to one another. So you'll have, what is the main point of this passage? And you'll have A and B that are almost exactly the same. So some important things to do whenever you're in this situation is, first of all, read all the possible answers. You don't want to leave any hanging. You want to make sure that you can eliminate all the wrong answers you possibly can. You want to get it down to 2 if you possibly can, and if you get it down to 2, then you'll be looking for differences in language. One might be more, accurate, one might be more broad. You'll have to decide between those 2 for yourself, but it's important to eliminate answers so that you have a better chance of selecting the right one. Another challenge that you'll face is that you'll be reading some very unusual topics. Most of them, I take that back, most of the topics will be relatively easy, will be familiar. They'll talk about science, they'll talk about politics, or language or cultures. But sometimes you'll get an unusual topic that you've never heard of, that you don't understand. And so what do you do in those situations? How do you face that challenge? Well, first of all, you want to be able to identify definitions, because they will include definitions for words that you don't understand. Also, to pay attention to the forest, once again, you can pay attention to the main point, to the organization, and to the viewpoints of different parties. So if you can get that down, you can get most of the answers correct. Don't pay attention to the trees because they will be more complex and more, time consuming. You can go back into the passage later. Just make sure that you can answer the questions, what arguments are being made, what statements support which conclusions, and who's saying what. I hope this has helped you. And just remember, practice makes perfect. So practice, practice, practice. You can get better at each and individual section. I recommend using the Power Score Bible for this as well, for the reading comprehension portion of the test. That'll really help you. They have some great worksheets that you can do. They have real test questions that you can answer, and they'll help run you through everything I've talked about and more. So get yourself a Power Score Bible for the reading comprehension section if you're not doing too well with that. And I hope you the best. I wish you the best. Thanks again for tuning in. I hope you come back next time. We'll be talking about the analytical reasoning portion of the LSAT. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll reply as quickly as possible or include the answers within my podcast. Special shout out goes to Ben Sounds again for this awesome intro-outro music. Go to bensounds.com.